Can you tell me a little bit about The Face of Struggle?
Okay, The Face of Struggle. This book. This was an idea that came from my French publisher. They wanted to do, they had just done a French translation of War in the Neighborhood that sold pretty well in France and actually got nominated for the best reprint at Angoulême Comic Book Convention. So it did fairly well. And they wanted, they were doing a kind of experimental series where they were doing limited edition printings of silkscreen comic books, very much the way the old wordless graphic novels by Franz Mazariel or Lynn Ward were woodcut publications, and then once they became popular, they were printed in offset. They were going to do a series of silkscreen books. They were going to do like a pressing of 300 copies, and then if it was successful, they would go back to print and do it in offset. And they wanted them to be wordless in the tradition of the old wordless books. And they said, we'd like you to do a book about the rise of fascism, and we'd like it to be influenced by Franz Mazariel's The Idea. And in The Idea, you have this artist who's sitting at his drawing table and this naked woman outside of his head and goes running out into the world, and the whole world is offended by the nakedness of this image. And so it's sort of a statement on obscenity and censorship and art. And I was like, okay, this doesn't play in 2019. You can't just have the female character be a man's fantasy. The female character has to have some authorship and some ideas of her own. But I thought the way female figures have been used as allegories for ideas throughout history, I have actually thought that was kind of interesting. I know that there's a feminist critique of that, but I actually thought it was interesting, and I thought something could be done with that. And so I came up with this wordless graphic novel where there's this woman who represents rebellion, and represents, the ideas of struggle. And then I kind of played her against a figure who's very similar to Donald Trump. And one of the things that interested me about Trump was a photograph I'd seen of him very early on in his campaign for president, where he's shouting, as his mouth is always shouting, but he's looking over his shoulder at the same time as he's shouting. Which, if someone shouts at you, they tend to look at you. They don't look over their shoulder. So it's a gesture which seemed to imply that the shouting was fake, was staged, that his mind was actually elsewhere. And so I got the idea of Trump as a guy wearing a fake scream, a fake face, that he'd put on. And so I got the idea that he stole this face, and actually, a big deal was made about the fact that Trump's wife, in her speech to the Republican convention, plagiarized Michelle Obama's speech to the Democratic convention. But not much was made of the fact that I found Trump's speeches that were stolen almost line for line from Bernie Sanders' speeches, and that he'd taken those speeches and rewritten them a little bit. And we went from saying, low-wage countries to saying Mexico, but it's pretty much the same thing said by Sanders and said by Trump. he even at one point said that if he were elected president, he would repeal Glass-Steagall, which of course he didn't do. But, you know, I became interested in the idea of Trump as this fake person, you know, this person who'd stolen other people's ideas, and also this very violent, pathological figure. Because a lot of my students really like serial killer stories. I don't like serial killer stories because some people in the Lower East Side were actually killed by serial killers. And so I kind of get revolted by serial killer movies and stuff. But one of the figures they were interested was this guy who would cut off people's faces with a chainsaw and wear their faces. And I thought, okay, what's the worst thing I could compare Trump to? Sure, a guy like that, you know? And so I got the idea that, you know, Trump cuts off the face of rebellion and wears it, and that becomes his identity. And he has this fake screaming face. You know, like one of the things that's interesting is like Trump has a very small mouth. He's a big man with a small mouth. And he tries to make his mouth look bigger by going like that, you know? But if you really look at him, he's still got a very small mouth. Trump, if he took better care of himself, would be considered a very handsome man by traditional Eurocentric notions of attractiveness. But first of all, he's overweight. And secondly, he deliberately distorts his own face to make himself look angry, and to make his mouth look bigger and to make his eyes look bigger when he's actually got a small mouth and a large chin. So I thought that was really interesting, that Trump was this man who was trying to look angry and trying to look like he represented the rage of the oppressed, when in fact, you know, he's one of the most privileged people in our political life, you know, having never had to work a day in his life. So I thought that made him an interesting figure, and I thought I could bring that out with this metaphor of cutting off a face and putting it on, which is a fairly violent metaphor. And I understand there's some people who need a trigger warning on this thing, because it's a fairly violent comic book. But I thought, if you can't do a violent comic book about Donald Trump, you can't do a violent comic book. I mean, you know, this is a guy who brags about, you know, the possibility that he could shoot someone, you know. So a guy who violates all of the boundaries we normally set for public discourse. So I felt like, yeah, I'll do a really violent comic about Trump and about American fascism. And yeah, so I did that. It first came out in France, and then AK Press picked it up. And one of the ironies of this is it went to press in April, a month after the whole country went into lockdown. And I was like, oh man, this book is screwed. I can't go on tour. There are no bookstores open. How will people read this book? And it turned out the online sales of the book were very good, and it did quite well. So I was very much heartened by that. And it told me something interesting about the way the world of publishing is moving. So that book was my statement on Donald Trump. One would hope it would have no further relevance because Trump will simply go away. I actually think that's unlikely. I think we're going to be seeing Trump in the next election if we don't see Trump in prison. So Trump is going to be on the American political landscape for a long time, and I think the book will continue to be relevant.